for all the match strikers.
This is Spiritual Pyro. Sarah, I have loved all of our conversation about the feedback that we're getting from these episodes.
Yes, it has been overwhelming, but like in the best way. Just hearing from so many different people, so many different women as they've been listening to these first few episodes, and the ways that some of our stories, our experiences have been connecting with others has blown me away. Like that was the hope, right? That's such a keystone piece of this work that we're doing, is that yes, it starts with us, but it doesn't end with us. But it's until you put it out in the world, it's kind of just this like gamble. It's like, well, this is the hope. I hope that this is what happens. And so just, getting messages, getting to have conversation with women and hear the ways that some of our stories are impacting and shifting the ways that they're moving through their own lives is just the most incredible thing.
Yeah, I think we know, like in theory, like on paper, we know that our stories impact each other. We know that we find ourselves in between the pages of each other's stories. But I feel like as we have kind of, flung open the cage door and this work that we've been, spending so much time on for so long, and to watch it finally fly, I think that the surprise for me is not that people are enjoying it or that they're liking it. There's this rumbling under the ground that when someone shares how their life is being impacted by something, when they share how they're moving differently or making decisions differently or seeing themselves differently or feeling freedom or permission or courage differently, it feels like the ground under our feet is like trembling. We say like there's a terraforming happening, that there's something new that is like breaking apart to begin with, but also that's going to be like shifting, and those tectonic plates, like all of that imagery just feels like we got to take our shoes off because it's holy ground. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not just like, that someone clicked like on a post when we share about an episode. It's those messages that are like, here, this is my life. And someone's sharing it and they're offering it and they're connecting over it. That has been so incredibly powerful. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for that, honestly. I mean, so on paper, in theory, we knew that those kinds of things might happen. And the hope is that there would be something powerful among us that would get shared, that we would get to interact with. But the way that it rumbles under the ground and that hum of change or that hum of freedom and courage is like, whew, like that's the part that catches in my throat. That's the part that takes my breath away, like every single time.
Well, it's this like we've been doing this work so isolated and so kind of really literally in the dark. We've disappeared. We went behind the scenes. There was so much we had to hold on to and keep really close, and it was really lonely.
Yeah.
And as we've been able to find these pathways to share, it's all of a sudden kind of like the lights get turned back on and we're like, oh my God, we're not the only ones in the room. we're not alone actually. And I think that is such an empowering and liberating feeling that I hadn't really anticipated. And I love this. So one thing that we've started doing whenever we hear a story that comes out of this work that we're doing, when a woman shares a story with us, is to strike a match and blow it out. And we're collecting these matches like story by story. And it's not something we're sharing the stories or these personal experiences. We're not even really talking about them with each other in detail. It's just this knowing, this sense of like, there are fellow match strikers out there, and there's something to me about the visual. I'm just keeping this like little bowl of burnt matches, and it's growing, and it's this really profound reminder, this tangible reminder that we're not alone. And how many times throughout the work we did coming out of 2018, confronting corruption, moving to the desert, walking those trails, so alone, and wondering, like, will it always feel like this? Like, have I lost myself forever? Did they take that part of me away, that spark, that fire, that energy? Did they take that? Like, do I not get to keep that with me? And I know you and I have talked about that so much, just about how do you find yourself again after we're enduring such trauma? Because that type of trauma requires such full capacity, focus, and energy just to get through a day, that there's not a lot of room left for the kind of thriving bigness of who we were before we were so wounded, before we kind of went into, I guess, survival mode, for lack of a better term. It's and we talk about that a lot. Of course, we talk about that a lot in the book. There are so many chapters written about the ways that we found to navigate and really chart some pathways back to ourselves, our whole full selves. And I love in the last episode, because we nod to that in one way. We talk through therapy and the yellow notebook and what does it mean to play. And when I think about some of the stories that have come out of that episode alone, I'm just like, oh, yes, like the collective of women remembering who the hell they are and what they want, and really taking some ground back to themselves. That's been pretty incredible too.
I want to honor those who maybe last week's episode was one of those episodes that was like, must be nice. Must be nice to play. Must be nice to want. Must be nice to dream. You know, when you're still in that isolation, when you're still in that lonely place, sometimes that feels so out of reach. And I think that we have a spectrum of women who are out along that path, and some are hearing the rally cry and are like clawing for it. Yes, yes, yes. And others are still a long way off. Others are still, you know, like that film that we love so much, The Young Woman in the Sea, and she's swimming in open water, and it's at night, and she gets in the shallows, and the shallows is where the boat can't go, right? So the shallows is that part where her safety net, her support system can't go with her. She has to swim the last part by herself. Whew. Like like I get choked up just thinking about it. And the moment, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but the moment where she realizes that she's truly just alone and all she has is herself in the water under the stars. And then she sees the bonfires on the bluff. And that is the only course direction that she then has, is she swims for those bonfires. She knows that that's the direction of land. And so I just think that, you know, we've talked about wants and needs and dreams and how difficult that was. And we've talked about what it means to ask yourself, you know, how to play in your own life. And we've heard the resounding yes, yes, yes from so many women already, even just this week. And I know that for every woman who is hearing that rally cry and is responding, there's also those of us who are still wondering if that's even in reach. those who are still feeling disoriented, like it's just you out in the middle of the dark ocean with nothing but the stars. And then there's that bonfire on the bluff.
Yes, I'm so glad you
So
named that.
that's what we are for each other, whether we're ready for that rally cry or whether it still feels like it's a long way off. So I feel like it's accurate, it's true to honor just the whole spectrum of women and their responses.
And we know it's not a linear journey. This is not the conversation we're having is not you get from A to B and here's how you do it. This is healing is a spiral. I think living is a spiral, and there are times that we are the ones swimming with the guide boat, like showing us where to go next, charting our course. There's times when we're the one floating under the stars, completely lost and exhausted with no direction. And there's times we're the ones lighting those big bonfires on the hills, right? Like we over and over and over in our whole life. And so this is a space that we can occupy with such reverence, with such deep knowing that we're not coming from a place of we've got it all figured out. We're coming from a place of like, look at all the different versions of me too. Look at all the different versions of with you. Look at all the different ways that it can be.
And it all belongs.
Okay. And so honestly, this is making me think of your chapter. This is making me think of one of your chapters in Skies that I really think I think she's wanting to be a part of this conversation. I mean, we're talking about boats and we're talking about water and we're talking about finding ourselves. I just don't know how we don't not talk about your chapter. So can you tell us maybe a little bit about, because I want to give some introduction, but I also want to do that in a way that feels, I don't know, full of like you. This is your chapter. This is your work. But I'm talking, of course, about to all the girls. And I'm wondering if you might be able to share a bit about that, like this experience that you had, really, that you share so beautifully. It's one of the chapters that I cannot get through without crying every time. And I've read that chapter dozens and dozens of times throughout the time of writing and editing and more editing and more editing.
Seriously.
And like, I know what's coming. Like I know how it's going to go. And I still can't get through it without crying. It cuts right to this deep, deep core feeling that I think is really in alignment with what we're talking about right now. And it all starts with a meditation class that you took. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the title, first of all, is just, it's a little cheeky because it's To All the Girls I've Been Before, which is honestly, it's a play on the young adult series To All the Boys I've Loved Before, which is something that my, daughter read through. And, so I think what's so funny is that when we're thinking about the feelings of isolation, when we're thinking about how sometimes when, we're in the shallows and we have to go that last part alone, but when we're also thinking about the bonfire on the bluff, like that's where it came from. So To All the Girls I've Been Before is this idea that we have a collective with each other communally, but we also have a collective within ourselves of all of the different versions of ourselves that we've ever been. Both our younger self, our older self, like we talk about that all the time, Sarah, is our younger self and our older self. What would make my 8-year-old self proud? What would make your 8-year-old self proud? Little Corey and little Sarah. Well, first of all, little Corey and little Sarah would have been such good friends.
Oh, we would have been best friends. We would have had
we would have been thick as thieves. 100%.
It would have been a little bit of trouble in there, but we would have done it. We would have had fun.
And then we talk about our older selves, like what would make our 80-year-old self proud, right? Like, that crone self, and how do we want our older self to look back on these years and these decisions and the way that we're moving through the world. So this idea that there is this collective of all of the versions of ourself within us is part of that impetus. And then also I do have to nod to the Taylor Swift video that she made where at the end, it's all of the different versions of herself standing in front of the jet. And, that's something that we laughed about during the time when we were working on our pieces and writing. And that's something that came up, and how funny and how clever and how brilliant and how genius that music video is, because of all of the different versions of herself that have been so heavily critiqued and have been under such a microscope. And that's what we often do for ourselves, right? We put different versions of ourselves under a microscope and analyze and critique and criticize and berate, and all the ways that we, think that we should have been better, we should have been smarter, we should have been somehow different. So to all the girls is this really compassionate look at just the ways that we tried so hard, right? We've circled that so many times, gosh, we were just so earnest. We just tried so hard, and that's kind of the energy of it. So it did start with a guided meditation. Our friend Steph leads and actually teaches now inner territory meditations, and she's a phenomenal guide. And it was in one of those sessions. It was a group session, and but remote, and I found myself in a boat off the coast, and found myself encountering and then pulling into the boat each different version of my younger selves, all of these selves that were lost at sea, so to speak. And it was a reclamation, it was a gathering, it was a collecting of those younger selves. It really was a journey through and to self-compassion, because at the time that was something that I did not have that in my tool belt. It was way, way easier at a point. It was way easier to be critical of all the things I should have done differently, and all the ways I should have been different, and all of the ways I should have been smarter and I should have known, and all the red flags I should have seen. And how did I get myself into this situation in a way that was very heavy and very critical? So to all the girls ends up being this beautiful belonging where all of my different versions of myself belong. And it ends with a bonfire on the bluff. So, of course it does.
Of course it does.
Of course it does.
One of the quotes that you have in that chapter that I return to often, I actually have it written down, is, so I just think it's so profound, and it's I'm proof that she survives. She is proof that I almost didn't.
Oof.
Like the power of those two sentences, the weight, especially in relationship to like what you're talking about right now, which is self-compassion, really. This sense that you can look at your past self, and you are representing something to her, and she's representing something to you. But it's this like we made it, we make it. Like come what may, despite all odds, here I am. Like, you're gonna get through it. And also, you are at a different point, looking back at that younger self and going like, I see you. Yeah. And you did the best you could with what you had. That is so profound to me. And that framework, we've talked about this before, you and I, what would make my younger self proud, what would make my older self proud, and living from that place, not necessarily with an energy of like fear or shame or like walking on eggshells, like not wanting to upset someone or be a disappointment or not get it right. Like, it's so not that energy. It's really like it's asking us to slow down and really almost be like self-led in our decisions. Like what we're doing,
Mm.
is it in alignment with myself now,
Mhm.
my younger self, my older
Mhm.
self? And
Okay.
yeah.
So now let's go there, because I think in our last episode, we talked about your work with Barbara, and which is very different from my work with Gina. So I think that I have learned so much, even just walking alongside you through your
Mhm.
journey with parts work and IFS.
Yeah.
And, in our last episode, we were talking about your story about the barn, and you write so viscerally about your girlhood in the Palomino chapter, which I think I referenced in that last episode. And I think that this idea of girlhood and this idea of who were you before the world told you who to be, I
Mhm.
think your story is so unique in that, and also so incredibly relatable for all of us. And so I would love for you to speak a little bit about the parts, a little bit about your journey into integrating that, and not in just when you were in therapy, but it really is part of how you move through your life now.
IFS, Internal Family Systems, is kind of the official name, but that to me has, I say this to anyone who will listen, like that has changed my life. It's really a
Mm.
type of therapy. It's a framework for a way to explore ourselves in a therapeutic way. When Barbara first introduced me to it, it felt so foreign, and I really couldn't
Mm.
wrap my head around the idea, because it's sort of this concept that we all have these parts inside of us that are essentially versions of us from our past, where I like to think of it like something happened, like whether it was traumatic or it was beautiful and gorgeous. It's almost like these pinpoints on a map of our older selves, where some kind of vow or decision, or this is how I see the world, or never again, something gets made. And it's almost like that part of us, whatever age we were at that time, almost makes a decision for like the way we see the world and the way we interact with the world.
Mm.
And so now, don't quote me on that. I'm not the founder, Richard Schwartz. I'm not an expert here. This is how I have made sense of it. But
Mm.
the way that Barbara introduced it to me was almost this, like, you kind of slow down. It's really similar to, I think, meditation in that way. There's a lot of like closing your eyes, breathing, centering yourself. When you find a moment, maybe a point in therapy where you get really activated, or you notice yourself shutting down, or you get really angry, or you get really emotional, those are kind of indicators where Barbara in our sessions would slow me down and go, okay, let's take a minute, close your eyes, do some deep
Mhm.
breathing, and then get curious. The invitation is always get curious. Like, who's showing up right now? Like who
Mhm.
wants to be heard? Who needs to be witnessed right now? Because usually it's a part that's feeling activated, because whatever we're talking about or whatever we're sharing feels really, really familiar. And so that part is like, oh, I know how to solve that problem. They raise their hand. They're like, I got this. I know how we survived it last time. So that's what we'll do again. And of course, all of this is like, it's not like there's a million tiny voices in my head and I'm responding to all of them right now. Right? It's all very internal and very slow. And there are times when she would take me through it where the parts, oh my goodness, my 13-year-old part, she is so sassy and so stubborn. And there were several times where the
Mm.
invitation would be, okay, girl, what do you have for me? And she'd be like,
Yeah.
absolutely not. You got to earn it, And I really had to do a lot of work, earning back the trust of some of those parts, because I had spent a
Ooh.
lot of time ignoring them and pushing them aside. Talk about self-compassion, like shaming them, judging them,
Uh-huh.
and really, yeah, not taking heed of whatever warning or fear they had that they were bringing to the
Mhm.
surface for me in whatever moment I happened to be in. And so it really took a long time of practicing. Okay, that's okay. Like, I just want you to know I see you. And if there's anything you want to share, I'm here. And it's really almost like it's inner child, but it's not, because it's, of course, we have these versions of ourselves from so many different ages as we go, and we collect more and more of them. My understanding is with IFS is that when we are living where one of those parts is sort of taking over and driving the bus and making the decisions, we're doing that out of fear. We're doing that because we're activated. And that's not really, that means we're not doing it from a self-led place. We're not making a decision that's responsive. We're making a decision that's reactive. And so that's usually a really good indicator that a part might be leading you or might be driving something forward. And so, I mean, it's a lot. There's a book I read called, I believe it's No Bad Parts. And that was a really great foundational catalyst just for understanding if anyone's curious about it. But for me, it went from this practice that I would get kind of nervous about in therapy when Barbara would ask me, because I'd be like, this feels so weird, or what's going to come up? You know, it's this like, to now something that I find myself checking in with different parts, even just like throughout my day. If I just get a weird phone call or something, I'm like, okay, how we doing? You know, anything need to come up? And usually if something does, I remind myself that I'm the safe grown up in the room now. Like, I'm the safe adult. I'm making the decision that's going to be the best decision, the safest decision for us. And usually that is enough of a relief that whatever felt afraid or got activated, I can almost physically feel myself settle. Like, whew, we're okay. Like, we've got this.
Okay, one of the things that you would say frequently that I come back to a lot when I'm thinking about these types of experiences is that those parts are always trying to protect, right? So it's kind of like anxiety. Like it, and I think of the little Inside Out, you know, the second Inside Out movie, that's such a fantastic, actually really beautiful look at anxiety and this desperation to protect. And that's what I think about with parts work and your journey through that, is that every single time you've shared one of those moments where you've had to remind yourself that you're the safe grown up in the room, it's in response to a part of you that's trying to protect, because you were so strong, whether it was at 13 or 23 or 33, whatever it was that desire to protect. And I feel like that is that connection point of self-compassion where it's just like, oh, honey, I know, like you were trying so hard to protect me, you know? And so you get that weird phone call, or that email comes in, or whatever it is, or that first podcast episode goes live, or whatever it is, right? And it's like, like that part of me is rising up again to protect. And so it's almost like, thank you, I've got this, you know, that I'm the safe grown up in the room as a response to that self-protection, which then, instead of making it this frustrating thing that we're trying to work through, or we're trying to get over, we're trying to get past, it's a coming alongside that part and letting them know they don't have to work so hard. Like you don't have to crawl on your knees and beg, right? Like you don't have to always fight.
Yep.
We don't have to always fight. So that, when you talk about like being able to sense almost that relief, it's that, what if everything didn't have to be so hard? What if you didn't have to fight every battle? You know, so like the way that those lessons that you have learned have permeated into my life is like every single time you talk about it, I'm like, oh, and there it is, and there it is, and there it is. So the ways that we get to find each other in each other's stories, like even now, even this, even just in friendship and in sisterhood and relationship, and it is this continual practice, as opposed to something that you work through, get through, and are finished and put on the shelf. It's this continual practice that has woven its way into your life and now goes beyond you.
I
I love that.
I love that too so much. It's just that collective. It's just the way that there's no gatekeeping. The generosity of
Mm-mm.
story is like, if you make it, I make it, that kind of energy.
Mm.
And I just was listening to a friend of mine who was telling me she's had back pain for years and hasn't found a way to resolve it. Just terrible, terrible back pain. And she recently went to a new chiropractor,
Mm.
and he was doing kind of this assessment or whatever, and he pinpointed exact place where the pain was coming from, and he was telling her the muscles around this point are so locked and tight, and he said that they don't know the wound isn't there anymore. Like that.
Ooh.
I know. We were just sitting out to lunch and I was like,
Oh.
okay, I'm going to write that one down in my notes
Yeah.
app. Like,
Wait a minute. Time out.
coming
Okay.
back to that. Yeah.
They don't
Yeah.
know the wound isn't there anymore.
Right. And so for years, they've been like locked around the wound that used to be there. And they're still locked, thinking we're doing the right thing. We're protecting the wound. We've got to stay. And so instead of just going in and like how other doctors had done, just adjust, he started with
Right.
that. And like, we've got to loosen that up before we can get to the rest of the resolution. And she just was talking about how profound it's been because it's working. And I mean, it's hard to not think about that in relationship to parts and these other conversations we're having, because it's like we talk so much about updating our older parts because they don't know yet. They're still stuck in, 2018 or 2004 or whatever it is, thinking that that's the reality that they're in forever until we kind of go out and pull them from the water and bring them into the boat with us. And we're like, hey, honey, hey, come with me.
Hey.
Like, here we are.
Yeah.
Let me update you.
You.
The wound isn't there anymore. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so good.
Okay. So now that you said that, now I'm holding up this book that I'm reading because it is exactly that. I mean, the beautiful metaphor of that very physiological experience that your friend had at the chiropractor. Okay, so I'm reading Gabor Mate's When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress. And really like in the late 2010s, so like I would say 2016 is when I was reading The Body Keeps the Score. So, that kind of language is now just like such a common part of all of our, dialogue and vernacular. But the body keeps the score. And to the point that we sometimes just really use it in jest, where it's like something happens, it's like, oh, your body is going to keep the score on that one, right? And we can laugh about it and understand just the reality of the ways that our body holds on to memory, holds on to experience, holds on to trauma. But this book, When the Body Says No, The Cost of Hidden Stress, is really a lot of the physiological connection to, at this point, I'm still early on in the book, to immunology, which is so fascinating to me because the ways that there's a line here toward the beginning that says, hang on a second, let me get to it. When we have been prevented from learning how to say no, our bodies may end up saying it for us. And then there's this idea of civil war inside the body. And I think that whether we're talking about trauma or whether we're talking about stress and chaos in all its different forms and the ways that manifests in our life, our bodies really do carry the very physiological effects of that. And we know that stress can kill, but we don't often really admit to the ways that our body is speaking to us and how that is a direct reflection often of what's going on in our lives. And I'm reading this book, and honestly, Sarah, I'm looking back at different points in my life and I'm going, wait a second. I had that crazy health incident and what was going on in my life at that point. And then wait a second, I had that crazy, crazy situation that I had to have all that testing done for. Like, what was happening in that season of my life? And when I think about the vertebrae and your friend at the chiropractor and the muscles being so locked in, they didn't know the wound was no longer there. And at the same time, sometimes our bodies are screaming at us and we don't realize the wound that is there, right?
Mm-hmm.
We
Wow.
can be so detached. We can have everything. We can be so locked down to survive our life, to get through the day, to, like you and I, like you still got to show up for work. Trauma doesn't mean you get the day off. Trauma doesn't mean you don't have to log in for work. Like you still got to show up for work. You still got to pick the kids up from school. Still got to be at the thing. Still got to have the Zoom meeting. Like our lives don't stop just because something is difficult or just because there is a stress point in our life that is unresolved. We don't get to put everything on pause. I still gotta order the dog's medicine. I still gotta figure out how to pay the bill. Still gotta, make sure that the kid has the ride home from the thing. Like, I mean, we're constantly managing so much that oftentimes we can lock ourselves down and be so disconnected from our physical body that we don't realize that there is a civil war happening inside of us. So I think about when I had first moved to Thailand and I'm meeting so many people and I'm making all these friends. And one of the first things that I started to notice was all of these women, expat women, all of these women who were about my age, who had been living in country for at least 2 years, and how many of them would share about being diagnosed with autoimmune issues,
Wow.
diseases, situations. And I was thinking, I'm new here. So I'm able to see a pattern because I'm not used to this. I'm not in these conversations all day, every day. But why are all of these women being diagnosed with autoimmune? And one of the things in this book that's Mate is talking about so much is autoimmune and how and why it presents when it does, in who it does. And it's not definitive, right? But there is this new element within medicine that is this combination of the physiology of our bodies scientifically and the very real experiences we have and the trauma that we survive and the stress that we survive and how those two things intersect. And that is so fascinating to me. So I think about these women and I think about the systems that we were all participating in, the systems that keep us small, that keep us quiet, that keep us under extreme stress, where we don't have a voice, where we don't have seemingly a way out. And that looks a million different ways. It looks a million different ways. It's not a one size fits all. But as I'm reading this book, I'm thinking of my own health situations. I'm thinking of so many women in so many different spaces in their life where their fullness and their voice and their real lived experience, there's not room for. And so in our last episode, when you talked about play and you were like, what if you made room for yourself in your own life? And then how that translates to our bodies, to our health, to our actual wellness, not wellness with air quotes, but our actual deep wellness and how we care for ourselves. And I think that too can be one of those points where it's like, yeah, it must be nice. Must be nice to have health insurance. Must be nice to have access to therapy. Must be, I've been that person. I've been that woman who has not had access to things and who has thought to myself, yeah, it must be nice. So I can appreciate that is true for other women as well. Yeah, it must be nice to be able to think about the toll that stress takes on your body. But when you're surviving your life, you can't think about that. You can't afford to. I feel like that's all swirling together right now in how we belong to ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that you spoke to to the systems, because as you were sharing, that's where my mind
Mm,
goes, is like, well, why is it like this?
yeah.
What's happening that is causing, because it's a pattern. It's not just a one-off. This is something that I think we're seeing more and more of. And this is a parallel line here, but I think it is also um, the tenacity of more women speaking
Mm,
up about their pain and about their struggles with different health issues, where we've spent just decades speaking up and not being believed, or being told
mhm.
it's in our heads, or there's not a study for that, or there's nothing that can be done, or it's just your age, or it's just how it is, or just deal with it. And so after a while,
Yeah.
what's the point of saying it hurts? It doesn't matter. Apparently it doesn't matter. What's
Yeah.
the point? And I think what we're watching happen as more women are sharing their experiences is that
Mhm.
other women are going, wait a second, I thought that was just normal, or just my
Mm,
age, or I just had to get over it. And all of a sudden, I felt that to be true for myself, where I'm like,
yeah.
oh, maybe that's not what I should have to just struggle through or suffer through. And maybe if it means I have to go to 5, 10 different health specialists to try to find someone who will take my whatever seriously, can
Mhm.
I do that? It's that acting on behalf
Mhm.
of self. It's practiced in that way too. And
Mhm.
because the system is set up that way, women's health is not prioritized. It's not studied as well. There are so many statistics. I wish I had
Yeah.
them in front of me right now, but it's a Google away, really.
Mhm. Yeah.
The difference between the way men's health is studied and women's health is studied kind of tells the whole story there. And so not only are we in these situations where the ways that, like, when we are told you can't be too big, you can't be too much, you can't feel too much, you have to stay small, you have to be whatever, that doesn't go away, right? It's
Mhm.
almost like it's the only way is through. And so if we're not going to express it outer in our outer life, are we internalizing it? And is it metastasizing and causing us to be sick? Because we'd rather be sick than be
Oh,
too much. We'd rather be sick because we can manage it and control it, and we can be fine. It's not so bad. It's okay. We'll be all right. We'll get through it. Versus, no, I'm going to be inconvenient and I might not be everyone's whatever, but I'm living my life. And I'm saying it in such simple terms.
mm,
It's so prevalent, and it's often so, it's on such a micro level that we don't even know we're doing it. That denial of self for the sake of comfort for others or convenience for others. You back to last week's episode and the idea of play, and how me choosing to value that element of myself, that is a worthy
mhm.
part of being a human being and living a life, and that it actually is, it's a key that unlocks this cage to so much more. um,
Mhm.
that was going to cause disruption in the status quo of even the flow of my life and my family's lives if we just cut that one ring out and go. That disrupted, that required things to shift in the way that we did our life, and that felt wrong, because the messaging that I'd
Mhm.
received from all of my years being a woman on this planet has been, don't be disruptive, don't be
Yeah.
difficult, you're fine, right? And
Yeah.
we got so good at being fine that we've been making ourselves sick.
Like, literally sick. And as if that, coming back to last week's episode again, like the martyrdom, as if that is some badge of honor, to take on uh everyone else's everything to our own detriment, often to our own death, that somehow is something that we should aspire to. And actually it's, I keep thinking about how, we keep reminding each other that we have to save ourselves. Like, no one's coming to save us. That idea that at some point somebody's going to come in and save us from whatever it is that we're not able to access. And when I think, when we really return to ourselves and are going through those therapeutic modalities to return and belong to ourselves first before we can belong to anyone or anything else, I think that is a reminder that we are the only ones that can save this life. Like, in this very real sense, this isn't even, I'm not even talking about like a spiritual part of the conversation yet, but really we have to take care of this self that we've been given. And that is actually such a revolutionary act of love toward the people around us. Yeah, like we've been that woman out along the edges, out along the trail in so many different ways, which is the only thing that we ever have to share. Like you say, Sarah, is all we have is our stories. All we have to share is our stories.
Mm-hmm. And so I think we're going to keep doing that here.
You've been listening to Spiritual Pyro with Sarah Carter and Corinne Shark on the 1C Story Network. For more information about this and all of our stories, please visit just1c.com. That's JUSTONEC.com.
Okay, but really. Okay.
The 1C Story Network, for the love of stories.